All right, so for my book report, I read How Much is Enough, and then it says Hungering for God in Affluent Culture, and it's by Arthur Simon. So this book kind of just talks about how the U.S. in modern kind of societies have a quote-unquote sickness for material items. And I'm going to kind of break down this book chapter by chapter quickly, and then I'm going to talk about some insights I gained from it. The first chapter is titled The Seductive Urge, which opens up with instilling the main point of you cannot serve God and mammon, which can be found in Matthew 6:24, and mammon in this case meaning like earthly possessions and material items. The second chapter focuses on how humans need to focus on what God can use and not earthly possessions. So we need to be more focused on doing things for God than we need to be going and buying something. The third chapter, titled Hope and Purpose, reassures us that not all material items are bad and that they can be used for the work of God's kingdom. Just make sure to keep it in check and make sure that you are, in fact, using it for God. Chapter 4, which is titled Rushing to Nowhere, talks about how we live in a really busy society, but a lot of the time that busyness is stemmed from things that shouldn't hold as great of an importance as they do. The top priority in our life should always be God and doing work for God's kingdom. Everything else should fall second to that. So if you're stuck between wanting to hang out with friends or you're wanting to go do something for God, obviously you need to choose God. But I think the tendency in our human nature is to want to go do what makes us happy and pleases us. So people tend to choose friends. Chapter 5, which is named Poverty of Riches, goes into detail on the tolls that money and possessions can bring into your life, and how even though it would seem like it would bring you happiness, it can actually make you a servant of materialism. So I think a lot of people struggle with this, thinking that money is going to solve all their problems and bring them happiness. But in fact, if you look at a lot of people who do have money, it's been the source of a lot of pain and grief in their life. And we just need to realize that it's not going to fix everything. Only God can fix everything. Chapter 6, The Sorrow of Pleasure, explains that pleasure should be a product of doing something for God. It should not be our main goal. So when deciding on an action or deciding what path to take, your deciding factor shouldn't be, is this going to bring me pleasure? It should be, is this for God? And if it truly is for God, then the end result will make you happy in the long run, even if it's not an initial gratification. Chapter 7, The Weakness of Power. This chapter focuses on power and how it can be used for good or for evil. And if you do have power but you choose to just sit back, that can be just as evil as being the perpetrator. Chapter 8 focuses on affluence and the faces of affluence, and talks about the more wealth you have, the more responsibility you have. And with the progressions in our society, reaching wealth isn't as hard as it used to be. So a lot of people are facing more and more responsibilities than they have in the past, and it's just hard to make sure that you're always keeping God at the main point and main central focus of that. Chapter 9 is titled How Much is Enough. This discusses how it is a tricky line to know when and how, if you are unsure, and if you need to be a blessing. So it's hard to know if you're doing enough or if you do have too much. And basically all it's saying that is if you do everything unto God, then you are okay. Chapter 10, Living Simply So Others May Simply Live, which discusses that the way we choose to live can affect others and how we need to be conscious in order to help nourish others. So this kind of goes back to people playing the comparing game. If someone were to see me with all of these things that, let's say I'm like posting on social media, it'd be really easy for them to fall into a rut and be like, wow, this is something I don't have, and kind of put them into a regression. And so we need to be careful and thankful for what we have, but not boast about it. And we need to make sure that we're not causing others to stumble because of our blessings. Chapter 11, Love and Justice, talks about how the little things can make a huge impact. And so that just means that if you do something little, it can cause a chain reaction and it can cause a whole global phenomenon, and we can get people online and on track with God. So just be conscious of everything you do. Chapter 12 is called Saying Yes to Life, and it focuses on giving yourself fully to what God has called you for. Chapter 13, Filling the Heart with Something Better Than Cash, which talks about setting advice and setting aside time for your life to be with God and focus on non-worldly things, but focus on your spiritual life with God. The last chapter 14 is titled Meek Inherit the Earth, which basically wraps up the book with saying that we are called to follow Jesus, and that the rich must humble themselves, and that the poor must realize that they are exalted in God and know that God loves us and He is there for us, and that if we just humble ourselves and bring ourselves to Him, it will all work out. All in all, I thought this was a very good book, and I would strongly suggest it to be on everyone's reading list. Some insights that I got through it was I didn't realize how much focus I put on my material items, and that also when looking for a career, I think I tend to look at what career is going to make the most money, but that shouldn't be my main focus. My main focus should be what God has called me to, and the money thing should just, God will figure it out. It shouldn't be at the top of my priority, and I think that's probably one of the biggest impacts that I got from this book.